Last week's kind of been this weird parallel universe where we've got this major national policy to introduce nuclear power with a one-page press release, and we've got a major ACT gaming policy with little more than a page-long press release. The parallels were not lost on me. Clubs obviously have savaged the plan that was released, concerned for how it would impact their viability. But a large part of their critique is that they were blindsided. They weren't consulted, and the Labor policy was put out in such a hasty, non-consultative fashion. The key part of the Labor gaming policy is to reduce the number of electronic gaming machines to 1,000 by 2045. One of the important things to understand about reducing the number of pokies is that on its own, it's not going to protect people from harm. Reducing numbers of pokies, even by large amounts, doesn't necessarily lead to a reduction in expenditure or harm. You can look at a variety of examples around the world demonstrating this, or you can just think about the situation logically. If people are spending unwisely on pokies, and perhaps they have an addiction, they're still going to spend their money when, under this plan, there are 3,000, 2,000 or even 1,000 pokies around the city in the coming decades. No, those machines, if they are still out there, need guardrails on them to protect people from harm. Those are measures such as limits on how much people can bet and lose. Now, one of the key facts to understand about this policy is that it comes as an alternative to the well-developed, costed and expert-endorsed proposal that the government could also adopt quite soon. That proposal is for mandatory pre-commitment, loss limits and a universal player card, all underpinned by a central monitoring system. You need the central monitoring system to make the protections effective, to prevent people venue hopping, and so that clubs themselves aren't responsible for implementing a series of ad hoc measures. Now, that proposal is universally lauded by credible harm reduction advocates as the effective way to protect people from gambling harm from poker machines. It is what the Canberra Gambling Reform Alliance is calling for. It's what the National Alliance for Gambling Reform is calling for. It's what the ANU Centre for Gambling Research endorses as the way to reduce harm, and it's what the Justice and Community Safety Directorate researched and developed as an effective proposal. Instead, without any consultation or costing, or indeed community support, the Labor Party popped out a policy that does not have a CMS, doesn't link together machines, doesn't have these universal loss limits, and instead relies on reducing machine numbers, something we know won't deliver the harm reduction. I think it's fair to say that the proposal hasn't been well received. It wasn't received well by the club sector, one might anticipate that. But more surprisingly, and I think more importantly, it also wasn't received well by gambling harm reduction advocates and experts. The National Alliance for Gambling Harm points out there will still be thousands of machines right up to 2045, and indeed still 1,000 in 2045. So this decades-long reduction in machines doesn't achieve the harm that it's suggested, the harm reduction that it suggests it might. The National Alliance goes on to say that the biggest knock against the ALP blueprint is the absence of a centralised monitoring system to link together venues and allow binding and default loss limits. Founder of the Hope Project and co-chair of the Gambling Reform Alliance wrote in the Canberra Times about Dr Patterson's approach to gambling harm reform. She criticised the plan to reduce poker machines to zero over decades. Now that has been the position, but now the plan is just to reduce to 1,000, so I am not sure what the outcome is. It's sort of a prohibitionist model, but not quite a prohibitionist model, and that's something I think will hopefully become clearer over the coming months. But the criticism was because the high level of gambling harm in the territory would just continue for decades, even as the numbers of machines reduced. Mr Zelger criticised that this approach came at the expense of a central monitoring system, which he says is needed to ensure people don't venue hop to avoid reaching limits of gambling losses. In fact, she said Canberra's gambling industry must be rubbing its hands together with glee over the approach. It's as if, in order to avoid the effective proposal looming before them, the Labor Party desperately dived out of the way, off the sensible path, and into a bramble patch. That's why I've moved the amendment I have today. I think there is going to be an ongoing debate. There is certainly room for some good discussion on this. I think there is a pathway through, and that is why my amendment notes that we obviously need harm reduction. It's something that we've been striving for some time. We also want to find a path for our community clubs to remain viable. I think we all understand the social impact they have in the city, the various roles that they provide, and Mr. Parton has gone to some length in pointing that out. And it calls on all political parties to support evidence-based and best practice gambling harm reduction policies, but also consider the ongoing sustainability of ACT clubs. That is the challenge for this Assembly, is to come up with a plan that delivers that and to work together to get it done. I commend my amendment to the Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Parton. The question is, Mr. Rattenbury, forgive me. You have the call on the amendment, Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I rise and speak in support of Mr. Parton's motion.
Thanks, Speaker.
And thank him for bringing it to the Assembly's attention. And I want to clarify for the record that I'll be speaking in my capacity as an MLA, member for Ginninderra, rather than as a committee chair. Madam Speaker, the community club sector in the ACT is hugely important to the City of Canberra and the lives of Canberrans. Canberra has been long regarded as a club town, which is a point of difference between the pub-preferring cities of Melbourne and Sydney. As Mr. Parton's motion highlights, the community club sector employs over 1,700 staff, manages over 400 hectares of community green space and supports nearly 400 community sporting clubs. Hear to them. In my electorate of Ginninderra, we love our community clubs, from the Burns Golf Club, the Raiders Belconnen out west in Holt, to the Belconnen Soccer Club to the north in Mackellar, and of course there's the Belconnen Bowling Club in Hawker, and Southern Cross Club in Jamison and to the south. There also happens to be two large Labor clubs owned by ACT Labor, the Ginninderra Labor Club and the Belconnen Labor Club. Ginninderra residents love their clubs because they provide amazing hospitality service, support for community organisations and a safe place to catch up with friends and family. These clubs build a level of social cohesion that is really important to communities, especially when times get tough. The ACT Labor Greens government have made numerous commitments regarding their plans for the community club sector in the ACT. These commitments, more often than not, seem to demonise this important sector to the local economy. ACT community clubs have contributed over $300 million in gaming taxes over the last 10 years and over $150 million in community grants and contributions. These community clubs, especially the ones in my electorate of Ginninderra, are vital to the economic and social well-being of our community. Industry stakeholders are hugely concerned with the impact that this government's commitments could have on the sector, including potentially the collapse of the club sector in the ACT. The gross irony being that few benefit more from community clubs than the ACT Labor and ACT Greens themselves, be it through the Canberra Labor Club Group or the CFMEU-owned Tradies Club Group. Labor and Greens cannot have their cake and eat it too, Madam Speaker. They are promising substantial reform that could risk the viability of smaller community clubs, all while the pokey-filled giants of Belconnen Labor Club and Tradies Dixon filled their preferred parties' pockets. It is the height of hypocrisy that those opposite are acting holier than thou on these issues when they attend sub-branch meetings next door to party-owned poker machine rooms. This hypocritical government needs to be forthright with Canberrans and the community club sector by appropriately expanding their agenda, just as Mr. Parton has called for. Madam Speaker, Canberra is a club town through and through, and the benefits of this status should not be underappreciated. And Madam Speaker, as I close, it's very disappointing to see the amendment provided by the Leader of the Greens in this Assembly, and when the motion itself calls on the government to explain to the community how it intends to assist them through their proposed transition, how to maintain sporting infrastructure, how they maintain the 100 community organisations that clubs support, how they intend to replace the hundreds of millions of dollars in foregone gaming tax revenue, and what about the 1,700 staff employed in our club sector? So, Madam Speaker, I do call for the members of this Assembly to support Mr Parton's motion, reject Mr Rattenbury's rather very watered down, weak motion, amendment to this motion, and to give a sign of support to our very important ACT Community Club sector that do so much for our community. I commend Mr Parton's motion to this Assembly.
The question is that Mr Rattenbury's amendment be agreed to the amendment and to close, Mr Parton?
Yes,
Thank
Madam
you.
Speaker. Mr Rattenbury's amendment, we thought about it. We, because, you know, he can be a reasonable fellow, Mr Rattenbury, and we like him. And we thought about it, but we won't be supporting the amendment. We like Dr Patterson too, to be honest, but we just think they're wrong. I appreciate that Mr Rattenbury's keen to take the heat out of this debate, but I would argue that if there is a time for heat in this debate, that time is now. Those in the club sector know that their backs are firmly to the wall. They know they have nothing to lose. And I would say to Mr Rattenbury that they're still a little suspicious that his tune might change after October. What I don't understand, Madam Speaker, is why Mr Rattenbury wanted to remove the part of this motion which called out Dr Patterson over her link to the Canberra Labor Clubs. Because I would say to Mr Rattenbury, she has tried to run straight through you with a savage hip and shoulder. She has attempted to have you taken from the playing arena in a stretcher, unconscious. And I have given you the opportunity to land a blow on her, and you've just looked the other way. You've just looked the other way. Do you reckon she's going to keep on hunting you? Because I think she will. I reckon she will. If Dr Patterson is as pure as she portrays in this space, if she is the Mother Teresa of gaming machines, she would be resigning as a member of ACT Labor and completing her term as an independent. Mr Rattenbury has not been able to fulfil much of his agenda in the gaming space, mainly because he discovered soon after taking up the role that what he said about the practical impediments, or what we said about the practical impediments, was actually true. And the stuff that he wanted to achieve was a little more difficult than he thought. He's trying, but it's hard. We're not really any closer to a central monitoring system. The Minister stated in at least one interview that his expectation is that the industry will be fully funding this monstrosity. The price tag on this and the ongoing costs will likely lead to the closure of a large section of the sector. And please understand that when the clubs close, that means the loss of jobs, it means the loss of community facilities, it means that the recipients of community contributions simply won't get those contributions. When clubs close, it has a massive ripple effect in the community. It means that some families will not be able to afford to have their kids play organised sport. It means that so many community groups have nowhere to meet. But people will still go and play the pokies in Queanbeyan. What you're doing here will change the fabric of Canberra forever. And so I'm not going to sign up to this amendment that simply calls for us to sit on the fence and trust that the Greens and Labor are going to do the right thing here. As far as the remarks from Dr Patterson, and she refers to the prevalent study, and I know I've spoken about this in the past publicly, but I was called up randomly and I participated in that gambling prevalence study. I sat through a 15 to 20 minute survey from an ANU person, and after doing the survey I had an even longer chat with the researcher who indicated to me that based on the survey I was indeed suffering from gambling harm. I was one of the, what was the percentage number? 33% of people or whatever who's suffering from gambling harm. In reality, I'm just not. Now, I didn't just scrape into the harm category. I was flashing red light like, you know, I'm going under. And we walked through exactly why I was, quote, suffering from gambling harm, and much of it was based on the fact that when the survey calculates gambling losses, it doesn't include progressive and cumulative winnings in those calculations. So if I gamble with $200 over a 3-hour period on whatever I may choose, whether it be on the TAB on my phone account or at the races or at the club. If I gamble with $200 over a 3-hour period, if that money fluctuates between $50 and $500 during that time and goes up and down, and I win some, I lose some, swings and roundabouts, at the end I finish with $175. In my view, I would suggest that I've lost $25. But not according to this study. According to this study, I could well have lost $600, $700, $800, $900 because cumulative losses are not balanced by cumulative wins. And so as a consequence of that and a number of other aspects of my gambling behaviour, I was very, very clearly classified as suffering from gambling harm, and I'm not. And I just wonder how many others. Now, I'm not suggesting for a single moment that there are not individuals, quite a number of them in this city and every other city, who are suffering from gambling harm. There's no question that that's the case. It's one of the reasons why the clubs in this town take that matter so seriously, and I think they do a better job than the clubs in Queanbeyan, and I don't wish to send those people to Las Vegas on Crawford Street. I don't want to send them over here. I want this town to remain a town of clubs, and I want the clubs to continue to do the amazing things that they do in this town. Sure, I want them to continue to modify how they deal with gambling harm. But what's been put on the table by Dr. Patterson will, without any shadow of a doubt, end the clubs industry in the ACT, and we're not interested in that on this side of the chamber.
The question is that Mr Rattenbury's amendment be agreed. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells. Two pairs or one pair? Two. So three. Who's with Braddock? Remind me. Yes, all. Who's with Braddock? Let's finish this and then come. I think we're just waiting on Miss Castley. Or are we done? Miss Orr? Are we done? Oh no, one more. We're waiting on Castley. Wonder if it's three. Wonder if it'll be a slip in just before or try to get in after. All those that can be present are present. Close the doors. Members, the question before you is Mr Rattenbury's amendment be agreed? Clerk.
Andrew Barr, Yvette Berry.
Yes.
Andrew Braddock, Joy Birch.
Yes.
Peter Kane.
No.
Leanne Castley, Tara Chain, Joe Clay.
Yes.
Ed Cox.
No.
Emma Davidson.
Yes.
Mick Gentleman.
Yes.
Jeremy Hanson, Elizabeth Kickett,
No.
Nicole Lauder,
No.
Elizabeth Lee, James Milligan.
No.
Laura Nuttall.
Yes.
Suzanne Orr.
Yes.
Mark Parton.
No.
Marisa Patterson.
Yes.
Michael Pedersen.
Yes.
Shane Rattenbury.
Yes.
Chris Steele.
Yes.
Rachel Stevens-Smith.
Yes.
Rebecca Vazzarotti.
Yes. Result to the division is of ayes 13, no 6, therefore it's resolved in the affirmative. So the final question is that the motion as amended is agreed. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Thank you, members. We're moving to motion on papers and pursuant to